The dog wasn't broken. That was the first thing Sloane Merritt noticed when she pulled into the gravel lot outside Camp Pendleton's K-9 evaluation facility. She could hear him from 50 yards away. Deep, guttural barking that hit the chain-link fence like it was personal. Not random aggression, not a dog that had lost its mind, a dog that was furious. There's a difference, and most people never learn it. She sat in her truck for a moment with the engine off, listening. The barking had a pattern to it. 3 sharp bursts, then silence. 3 more, then silence. Like Morse code, like something that used to mean something to someone, and now just echoed in an empty room. She grabbed her field notebook from the passenger seat, worn brown leather, the spine cracked from years of use, and stepped out into the dry California heat. The facility looked the same as it had the last time she'd been on a military installation. Utilitarian, no nonsense, every building the color of old concrete. A chain-link training yard stretched out behind the main building, and inside it she could see a large Belgian Malinois pacing the far end like he was measuring something. Back and forth, back and forth. The dust kicked up around his paws in small red clouds. A staff sergeant named Dwight Calloway was waiting for her near the gate. He was a big man. Not just tall, but built like something that had been assembled from separate pieces of equipment, and he watched her walk across the lot with an expression that said he'd already decided something about her before she got there. "You're the evaluator," he said. "Sloane Merritt." She extended her hand. Animal behavior consultancy contracted through. "Yeah, I know who you're contracted through." He shook her hand briefly, the way people do when they've decided the gesture is a formality. Didn't expect them to send a civilian. They usually do. He looked at her for a beat too long. "How old are you?" She smiled, because she'd learned a long time ago that smiling was faster than explaining. "Old enough to have my contractor's license." She nodded toward the yard. "That's Kodiak." Calloway turned, and something shifted in his face. A flicker of something she couldn't quite name. "That's what's left of him." The room they brought her into first was a briefing cesspit. A folding table, 4 chairs, a whiteboard with half-erased diagrams on it. 3 other men came in behind Calloway and arranged themselves around the table with the practiced casualness of people who spent a lot of time in rooms like this together. She recognized the body language. Not hostile, not yet, just evaluating. Just measuring the distance between what they expected and what had walked through the door. Calloway introduced them without much ceremony. A master sergeant named Beckett, red-faced and broad through the shoulders. A gunnery sergeant named Trask, who was younger than the others and kept his arms crossed. And a man they called Chief Riordan, who sat at the head of the table and said nothing while Calloway talked. "Kodiak is a 4-year-old Malinois," Calloway said, pulling up a photo on a tablet and sliding it toward her. 5 confirmed deployments. One of our top-performing combat dogs for the last 2.5 years. His handler, Staff Sergeant Elliot Prudhomme, was killed in action 8 weeks ago. Sloane looked at the photo. Kodiak mid-run, focused, ears pinned, every muscle doing exactly what it was supposed to do. She'd trained dogs that looked like that. She knew what it took. "Since Prudhomme's death," Calloway continued, "Kodiak has been unmanageable by any handler on this base. He bit Corporal Fisher badly enough to require stitches. He destroyed his kennel 3 times. He hasn't eaten consistently in 2 weeks." He paused. "Command has given us 5 days to determine whether he can be reassigned to a new handler or whether he needs to be retired. And retired means euthanized," Chief Riordan said. It was the first time he'd spoken. He said it flatly, not cruelly, but without softening it either. "We don't have the resources or the facility to rehabilitate a combat-trained animal that's become a liability." Sloane nodded slowly. "What does his behavioral assessment show?" Trask made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The behavioral assessment is, he tries to take your arm off." "That's not a behavioral assessment," Sloane said. "That's a description of one symptom." Trask unfolded his arms. Calloway looked at her the way people look at Ntukmon who has just said something they find faintly amusing and mostly irritating. "Merritt," Riordan said, "I want to be straight with you. I've seen 3 so-called specialists come through here in the last 6 weeks. 2 of them lasted 20 minutes in the yard before they walked. The 3rd one didn't even make it to the gate." He leaned forward slightly. "What are you going to do differently?" She picked up the tablet and studied the photo again. "I'd like to review his full training records, his deployment files if you can get them, and I'd like to observe him from outside the yard for about an hour before I do anything else." Riordan glanced at Calloway. Something passed between them. "That's it," Trask said. "That's where I start." "The other evaluators started with observation too," Calloway said. "It didn't help them. Then maybe they weren't observing the right things." She set the tablet down. "Can I have the files?" She spent 40 minutes outside the yard, just watching. Kodiak paced like she'd seen him doing when she arrived, but she watched the pattern of it now, with the files open in her lap. She cross-referenced what she saw against what she knew from his training record. Malinois, drive-bred from working lines in Belgium, trained at Lackland, bonded to Prudhomme from the start of his service career. No previous handlers, 1 person from puppyhood through 5 deployments. An entire working life built around 1 relationship. She watched the way Kodiak moved. She watched where he looked. She watched what happened when a kennel tech walked past with a bag of food, and what happened when one of the handlers appeared at the fence, and what happened in the gaps between those things, when he was left alone with nothing but the sound of the bass and the heat. He wasn't pacing randomly. He was checking the gate. Every circuit he ran, he came back to the gate, the entry point, the place where for years 1 specific person had appeared at the beginning of every day. She wrote 2 words in her notebook, anticipatory grief. Then she closed the notebook and stood up and walked to the equipment room, where Calloway was waiting. "I want to go in," she said. He stared at her. "With him. I want to go into the yard." "That dog put Corporal Fisher in the infirmary," Calloway said. "I know. Fisher has 8 years of canine handling experience. I know. He didn't make it 30 seconds. I understand that." She held his gaze. "I'd like to go in." The silence stretched. From outside she could hear Kodiak's barking resume. 3 bursts, then quiet. 3 bursts, then quiet. "I'm not authorizing that," Calloway said. "Then get me someone who can." Chief Riordan came out to the yard himself, which told her something. He wasn't the kind of man who delegated things he felt responsible for, even when delegation would have been easier. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched her while Calloway explained what she'd asked for. "You want to go in with Kodiak," Riordan said. "Yes, unsecured. With a bite sleeve, if you have one that fits. But yes." He turned and looked at the yard. Kodiak had gone still at the fence line, watching them with the focused, unblinking attention of an animal that registered human presence as a variable and was constantly recalculating what it meant. "What do you think you're going to accomplish that Fisher didn't?" Riordan asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I've read his file. I know how he was trained, and I've been watching him for the last 40 minutes, and he's not an aggressive dog. He's a grieving one." She paused. "There's a difference, and the response to each one is completely different." Riordan looked at her for a long time. The bass sounds continued around them. Distant engines, someone shouting a drill count from across the yard, the low mechanical hum of the ventilation units on the kennel building. "If he takes a run at you," Riordan said quietly, "there is nothing I can do fast enough to get you out of there without serious injury. You understand that? Yes, and you still want to go in?" "Yes." He looked at the dog again. Then he said, "Get her a sleeve, Calloway." She stood at the gate for 2 full minutes before she opened it. Behind her she could feel the weight of the men watching. Calloway, Trask, Beckett, and Riordan gathered at the fence. She heard Trask say something quiet to Beckett. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. Kodiak was at the far end of the yard, ears high, body low and coiled. He'd stopped pacing. He was watching her with the absolute stillness of an animal deciding. She didn't raise the sleeve. She didn't position herself defensively. She kept her posture open, shoulders relaxed, weight balanced, not the body language of a threat, but not the body language of prey either. Just a person standing in a yard, present and unhurried. She said one word, in Dutch. Low and steady, the way she'd been taught a decade ago by the man who'd first put a working dog in her hands. Rustic, quiet, easy, settle. Kodiak's ears moved. She said it again, same tone, same cadence, rustic. The Malinois took one step forward, then another. His body was still taut, still reading her, but something in the tension had shifted. The way tension shifts when it meets something unexpected. She crouched down slowly, not to the ground, not submissively, but at his eye level. She held her left arm, the unsleeved one, loose at her side. She kept her eyes soft, not direct, not challenging. Rustic, Jongen, she said. Easy, boy. He took 3 more steps, stopped. The low growl that had been constant since she entered had gone quiet. From the fence line, she heard someone say, barely above a breath, "What the?" Kodiak walked the rest of the distance in 4 seconds. He reached her and stood there, chest heaving, eyes tracking her face with an intensity that she recognized as something other than aggression. His nose worked the air. She stayed still. Then slowly, she raised her right hand, palm up, not reaching, just present, and let him come to her. He put his nose against her fingers. Behind her, nobody spoke. She spent 20 minutes in the yard. She didn't try to command him. She didn't run drills. She sat cross-legged in the dust in the middle of the yard, and Kodiak circled her twice, and then lowered himself 3 feet away and put his head on his paws and watched her with those pale, exhausted eyes. When she finally stood and walked to the gate, Calloway was waiting for her on the other side. His expression had changed. He was working hard not to show it, but she could see it. The particular look of a man recalibrating against his will. "What did you say to him?" he asked. "A Dutch command, rustig. It means settle." She unstrapped the sleeve and handed it to one of the kennel techs. "He's trained in Dutch. It's in his file." Calloway blinked. Fisher had the file. "I know." She said it evenly, without inflection. Fisher also approached him in the dominant positioning method, which works for most dogs. It doesn't work for a Malinois who has spent his entire life with one handler and is interpreting that posture as a challenge, not a command. The silence was different now. Trask had his arms uncrossed. Beckett was looking at his boots. Riordan stood slightly apart from the group, watching her with an expression that was harder to read. "He's not a broken dog," she said. "He's a dog in mourning. He lost his person. He's waiting for someone to walk back through that gate who is never going to come." She looked back through the fence at Kodiak, who had resumed his slow circuit of the yard, but was moving differently now, less frantic, more deliberate. What you're interpreting as aggression is actually the behavioral expression of prolonged acute stress, combined with anticipatory behavior that no longer has an outlet. She paused. "He's not dangerous. He's heartbroken." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Calloway said, "That's a lot of words for a dog that bit a Marine, and that Marine approached him the same way you'd approach a dog that needed to be dominated." Kodiak wasn't attacking him. She met Calloway's eyes. He was pushing back against someone he didn't trust, who was treating him like a problem to be controlled instead of a partner who needed to be understood. Riordan spoke. "Can he be saved?" "Yes," she said, "but not the way you've been trying to save him." They gave her a week. She came every morning before the base fully woke up, before the engines and the drills and the ambient noise that Kodiak associated with handlers who came and went, and never stayed. She sat outside the yard and talked to him, quietly, consistently, letting him learn the sound of her voice the way she'd learned to read his behavior. She brought food but didn't offer it as a reward for compliance. She offered it as a simple fact. "I bring things to you. I will continue to bring things to you. I will be here tomorrow." By the 4th day, he was meeting her at the gate. By the 6th day, he was running beside her in the yard, responding to commands, his body language transformed. Still watchful, still serious in the way that working dogs always are, but with the coiled spring tension replaced by something that looked closer to purpose. On the 7th morning, Riordan and Calloway came to watch. She ran him through his full deployment command set, in Dutch, in the order she'd reconstructed from his training records. Retrieve, hold, advance, down, search, clear. He performed each one with the precision of an animal, returning to something it had always known how to do, waiting only for a voice it could trust to ask it. When she signaled the final hold, and he dropped to a perfect settle at her feet, she heard Calloway exhale. "That's the dog I remember," he said, almost to himself. Riordan came to the fence. He looked at Kodiak for a long time, then at Sloane. "How did you know?" he asked. His file had his full command language. Nobody had used it. She shrugged slightly. To Kodiak, every person who came into that yard was a stranger speaking a language he didn't know. Can you imagine losing someone you've trusted with your life, and then being surrounded by people who don't even know your name? Riordan looked back at Kodiak. The dog was watching Riordan the way working dogs watch people, calmly assessing, filing information. "He needs a permanent handler," Sloane said. "One person, someone who will learn his full command set and his behavioral cues and commit to building with him over time. He cannot be cycled through a rotation." She picked up her notebook. "He's not a tool you reassign. He's a working partner, and he operates like one. And if we can't provide that," Calloway asked, "then find him a retirement placement where someone can, a search and rescue unit, a civilian law enforcement K9 program, a training facility." She held his gaze. "But don't euthanize him for grieving." 3 weeks later, she got a call from Chief Riordan. She was in her truck on a highway outside Phoenix, heading to another evaluation on another base with another dog that someone had decided was a lost cause. She hit the speakerphone and listened to the road noise mix with Riordan's voice. "We found him a handler," Riordan said. "Corporal named Adkins, 24 years old, grew up in rural Georgia, has been working dogs since he was 12. He requested the assignment. How's it going?" "Slowly," Riordan said. "Like you said it would." But Adkins went out and got a Dutch language guide on his own. Day 2, he came in using the command set. A brief pause. Kodiak sat for him the 2nd day, ate a full meal. She felt something she didn't have a word for. Not quite pride, not quite relief, but something that lived in that neighborhood. "That's good," she said. "You want to know something else?" "Sure." "Calloway asked me if you'd be available for another case. We've got a Rottweiler at the facility at Lejeune that." She was already smiling. "Send me the file." There was a moment she kept coming back to in the weeks that followed. Not the moment Kodiak had responded to her, though that one mattered. Not the moment Riordan had said, "Can he be saved?" And she'd said yes, though that one mattered too. The moment she kept returning to was simpler than either of those. It was the morning of the 2nd day, before anyone else had arrived at the facility. She was sitting outside the yard in the early grey light, and Kodiak was on the other side of the fence, and he'd come to stand near her, not at the fence, not right at it, but close. Just close enough. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the gate, and she understood, sitting there in the dust with the sounds of a sleeping base around her, that what she was watching wasn't a broken dog. It was an animal waiting for someone to come back. It was loyalty that had nowhere to go. It was the specific ache of a bond that had been cut off without explanation or closure, and the animal on the other side of that fence had been doing the only thing he knew how to do, waiting, holding the position, staying at his post. She'd reached through the fence and pressed her palm flat against the chain link. He'd turned his head and looked at it. Then, slowly, he'd taken one step closer. That was all. That was enough. She wrote something in her notebook that morning that she didn't usually write. Field notebooks were for data, for observations, for the behavioral lexicon of animals in crisis. But she wrote it anyway, and she'd left it there, and when she read it back now, She still thought it was true. He was never broken. He was just waiting for someone to finally speak his language. Some losses can't be undone. Elliot Prudhomme wasn't coming back. That gate was never going to open the way Kodiak had spent 8 weeks waiting for it to open. But there was something on the other side of that loss. Not a replacement, not a substitute, but a new commitment, a new voice, a new person showing up every morning and saying, "I see you, I'm learning you, I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't the same, it wasn't supposed to be, but it was enough to work with. And sometimes, in this line of work, that's the whole of it. Finding the animal that everyone else has written off, and recognizing that what looks like damage is actually a door, and that the only thing standing between that animal and a functional life is one person willing to do the slow, unglamorous work of earning trust back from scratch. Sloane Merritt had been doing that work for 11 years. She had the cracked notebook spine and the dust on her boots, and the calluses on her left forearm to show for it. She didn't need the acknowledgement, though she'd gotten it that morning in a quiet way that mattered more than she'd expected. Riordan coming to the fence, watching Kodiak move through his commands, and then looking at her and giving her a single nod. She'd nodded back. That was all. That was enough.